Mario and his companions have had a colorful, family-friendly racing hobby for almost 30 years. This racing hobby has sold more games than the entire Halo series and the entire Animal Crossing series combined, and more than every Zelda game ever released. Much of this is due to the series' ability to appeal to absolutely every demographic of player. If you've never seen a video game in your life, I doubt you'd need a tutorial to decipher Mario Kart's controls. This is a whole day and drive around the track game with some items. Yet at the same time, there are dedicated speedrunning communities for each installment, featuring insanely skilled players who glitch their way through some tracks in under 10 seconds. So basically, everybody across this spectrum can find something to enjoy about Mario Kart. And to Nintendo's credit, they've kept the quality of each mainline kart game fairly high, in large part thanks to their consistent tweaking, adding of new gameplay elements, new characters, new environmental design, all that stuff. They seem to do just enough to keep the series fresh, which is utterly impressive considering how many of these there are. This consistency of quality applies to their soundtracks as well. Mario Kart features an insane amount of dope music composed by many of Nintendo's finest over the past few decades. Some of my absolute favorite video game compositions come from this series, and my musicianship has been influenced by a surprising amount of theoretical concepts that I first heard in one of these games. In this video, we're going to explore one from each of them chronologically, and I'll get a little bit into how Nintendo has slowly evolved their general formula for the soundtracks over time. Soyo Oka's score for the first game was masterful enough not just to be good, but also to set the tone for the entire rest of the series. She established the formula of funky sus-chord stuff for the menus, and highly stylized individual themes for each level. Although the sus-chord menu jams were commonplace in 1992, and yes, I checked, Super Mario Kart goes way harder in terms of having completely separate themes, styles, and instruments for each track. Even within each individual song, these are often very dynamic arrangements. The theme for Super Mario Kart's battle mode starts out as a riff-driven rock throwdown in B-flat mixo. But then at the bridge, Oka throws us a beautiful chord progression, which borrows from B-flat minor, and then it voice leads into just completely different territory. The first part is a beautifully voiced G-flat major 7 to D-flat major 7 over F. Basically, these middle notes here are almost as low as you'd ever want to voice fourths like this before they start to sound muddy, but they're just trebly enough to sound warm and full instead of that. Then the next couple harmonies are E minor 7 and A sus, which are just totally out of the key of B-flat major or minor. This progression is made to work here for a couple reasons. Despite the chords doing odd stuff, the melody stays very consistent in rhythm and range. At the moment we switch to E minor 7 harmony, the melody is basically just copy and pasted a step down, and it feels like a smooth continuation. And not only that, all the notes in the second and third chord, where this major shift happens, just happen to voice lead so well into each other. Each note of D flat over F can lead chromatically into a note of E minor 7. The 64 version may feature my overall favorite soundtrack from the entire series. Each song has some musical nugget worth chewing on, and there's a reason I've done like 3 bit blitzes of them so far. The one that I always gravitate to most is the 11/8 groove found in the Winning Results theme. This soundtrack was longtime series composer Kenta Nagata's first go at it, and yet I love how instead of giving us a safe and happy 2-chord vamp for this graphic, he instead chose the path of gnarly 11/8 fusion stuff. Each measure that Nagata's virtual band plays consists of 11/8 notes. What we often do to make counting and playing easier in odd time signatures is group each measure's beats into smaller, more easily recognizable chunks. We could turn this 11 into 4 beats, 3 beats, and 4 beats. Similarly, we could turn it into 2, 2, 3, 2, 2. Now, with this in mind, let's keep going a bit to hear the variations continue developing. The Game Boy Advance entry in the franchise, as usual, received positive reviews from critics and gamers in the early 2000s. For this game, I was originally going to talk about how Game Boy Advances were built with a previous generation Game Boy sound chip, as well as their more updated 16-bit style sound chip, meaning a lot of these songs are a fascinating blend of 8-bit and 16-bit orchestration. I honestly can't say I've heard a lot of soundtracks do this effectively, but Super Circuit definitely does so. It also turns out that this game has my favorite original Rainbow Road theme. After having listened to every one of them from every game, including the arcade stuff, I have determined that what makes a good one is being able to strike the right balance between Mario Kart's usual funkiness and Nintendo's usual heartwarming fanfare. Rather than stopping the track every 5 seconds and explaining when things are funky and when they're good old-fashioned Nintendo cheese, I designed the funkometer to do this visually as I play you through a few sections. The music for Double Dash is good in that it perfectly implements the Mario Kart soundtrack formula. However, I do find there to be an overall lack of unique or inventive musical moments. Every song is pretty much exactly what you would expect from a good polished Nintendo game. And again, it's good stuff, it just doesn't have the same attitude and willingness to break convention that drew me to some of its predecessors. Regardless, there are tunes I enjoy here. My absolute favorite being this funky 8-bar fusion loop composed for the menus. This groove makes use of a concept I spoke of a couple videos back, the concept of lowercase funk. Basically, songs can be made funkier if, instead of having the whole rhythm section play the same rhythms together, doubling each other, you create a separate rhythmic part for each player, thereby creating lines and counterlines, etc. These melodies create sort of a friction against each other I like to call funk. This is how Double Dash's main menu theme is composed. Every single synth instrument plays a different rhythmic line, and they all complement each other in a way that feels super funky. Here are the synth lines without the drums and slowed down. The Kart series, in my opinion, regained its musically inventive nature with the DS outing. I'm especially impressed by the theme for Tick Tock Clock, which is based on a Mario 64 level that didn't even get its own original theme a decade prior. This tune kind of feels like a throwback to the musique concrète era, which was when composers in the 40s and 50s really first began piecing music together with pre-recorded audio and other warped elements. It's also a perfect example of emulating the level environment in musical ways. In this case, the environment being the inner workings of an erratic and unpredictable clock. Some of these methods are more macro, like the decision for every single chord in the song to borrow from the Lydian scale, giving it kind of an otherworldly flavor. Others are much smaller details, like slightly detuning certain notes, making certain instruments cartoonishly plucky and staccato, stuff like that. All of this enhances that feeling of being inside a strange, broken device. I chose Funky Stadium's theme originally because it has an insane slap bass part, which I think qualifies it as polytonal funk. However, while listening to it a few hundred times to transcribe this bass line, I kept noticing just a ton of classic hip-hop samples. This tune is covered with some of rap music's most iconic instrumental moments. It actually ends up being kind of a brilliant homage to the era of DJs, sampling, and analog production. The classic sample stuff starts right from the beginning. You may recognize that squealing horn sample from, well, kinda everywhere. It's actually originally a James Brown tune called Get up off of that thing! Hip-hop producers for decades have been using this exact horn hit, often specifically as a reference to old-school rap music. Another fun one is the legendary orchestra hit. This sample has been in wide circulation all the way back since 1979, when it was a patch called ORCH 5 on the Fairlight CMI. For the past few decades, this exact sample has absolutely been used by thousands of artists. You've probably encountered it yourself just messing around on a toy keyboard. The musical moment that was digitized into ORCH 5 happens to be taken directly from a massive orchestral hit that Stravinsky wrote. So yes, Funky Stadium samples Stravinsky. And so have roughly a million more people than I decided to put on this list. The fact that such a vital strand of hip-hop DNA is actually Firebird Suite is kind of just another one of those fascinating musical connections that we get from the history of sampling. Wario Shipyard might feature my favorite individual song in the entire series. From start to finish, it is an absolute shredfest of a composition. And I think it's worth noting that for whatever reason, Wario just consistently seems to get incredible music throughout his various Nintendo-sponsored exploits. There's sort of a dark, modern jazz flavor to much of his tunes, which makes sense because he's the anti-Mario, and much of Mario's music is cheerful classic jazz. Anyway, I may do a separate video analyzing this whole tune because there's so much to dig into, but today we're specifically going to check out what I think is the Shipyard's most distinctive feature: insanely nasty modern jazz licks. These come fast and heavy right from the beginning. The harmony happening here is actually way less complicated than it sounds. This measure consists primarily of notes you'd find in an A minor 7 flat 5 scale. The next measure is D7 stuff, and then we're in G minor. A jazz musician would refer to this as a 2-5-1 chord progression. Despite being a very standard implied chord progression, this melody is super angular. It's not just comprised of steps and chord arpeggios, we have major back and forth leaps between some of the notes, and basic stepwise at other locations. It's this constant variation of the shape of the melody that makes it so interesting. The second lick we're going to analyze is much more chromatic and tension-fueled. Keep in mind this is happening over a G minor, so here are our chord tones in G minor, which sound like resolution points when you get to them in the melody, and here are the bunch of little chromatic passing tones that add tons of color. There are more of these throughout the tune, but just take my word for it, this is such a dope song, and I promise I will revisit it in a future video. Mario Kart 8 is universally celebrated due to Nintendo's hiring of a live orchestra to combine with their classic synth elements. I love this concept, and love a lot of the tracks, but I've got to be honest, I still do think overall Nintendo underutilized the abilities of their live players by making most of these arrangements kind of even more static than usual. That being said, there are songs within the soundtrack that totally capture my imagination, and in my opinion, their arrangements capture the dynamism that you can get from a live band. Sunshine Airport is at the absolute top of the list for me in this regard. This is a good composition that becomes a great song because of its constantly evolving orchestration. Even just the very first set of instruments, which is a live band with a live synth player taking the lead on the melody, it's like the perfect sound palette for a game like this. As we progress through the song, then you have sections that are much more synth, some that are just strings and percussion, parts where the bass drops and it feels like you're going through a filter. Musically, it gives the same sensation as if you were driving through a Mario Kart level, and I think it's a very, very effective video game track. And this is where I end my strangely edited video love letter to Mario Kart. I am not exaggerating for the sake of the video when I say that these games were a part of my development as a musician, and just so many of these songs are just insanely cool. As usual, I'm leaving some sources and other extras in the description, and it would help me out a ton if you could subscribe and like, and thanks for watching.